However, it's streamlined as mentioned.
So, two great examples, but Final Fantasy XI is streamlined. Final Fantasy XI was a streamlined experience for the MMORPG player. What? That's amazing. I'm going to come out and say I don't think it's possible to review an MMORPG, especially one that is evolving and changing over time as any MMORPG should. I mean, do you review what it is now, what it was when it started, somewhere in the middle? Where do you define that moment? And with a game like Final Fantasy XI that's had an 18+ year run, go Final Fantasy XI. I think it's an impossible ask. Luckily, GameStop tried to do it for us back in 2003. When the game was clearly at its peak. So I'm going to link the original article here, but they put together a video that I thought we should go through now. In all seriousness, I stumbled across this looking for any footage I could find on the Final Fantasy XI PS2 experience, which, you know, I have no footage. I have some screenshots, but that's about it. And I couldn't wait to watch this. I have not watched it yet. I'm real hyped. The first Hunt for Games reaction video for the GameSpot review of Final Fantasy XI, November 14th, 2003. Let's do it.
Final Fantasy XI isn't exactly a new game. It just happens to be newly released for the PlayStation 2 in North America.
Dude, this guy has no idea. Like this video if you're watching in 2021. Final Fantasy XI is what? Almost 19 years old now? He's like, it's pretty old. It was like a year old.
However, it's been out for the PC for a number of months, and it's been out in Japan for a number of years, actually. This game isn't quite as graphically impressive as it was when it was first released, but it's certainly got a lot to offer, and in fact, it belongs to one of the only genres that actually gets better with age. It's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, which means that the world is constantly evolving, and you take part in this big, persistent world with a lot of other players. You've probably...
Can we just talk about this screen real quick? Like, it's so fuzzy you can barely even read it. Now, to be fair, when it was on the TV yourself, not like digitally rendered and then re-recorded and then rendered for YouTube and all this stuff, it wasn't quite that bad. But like, this was all you had. You had this tiny little 4x3 screen, most of which was taken up by a chat box that would, you know, slowly drift away. But look at this lively Bastock market. This is beautiful.
Heard of this type of game before. There are games like EverQuest. They've been around for years. Even on the PS2, you've got EverQuest Online Adventures.
That was the only comparison. That was the biggest name that they had at the time to make you understand as a viewer what a MMORPG was, what a massively multiplayer online role-playing game could be, because there was no WoW. Everybody now, they're like, yeah, have you ever heard of World of Warcraft? World of Warcraft wasn't going to come out for another year. Isn't that crazy? It's wild. So they're like EverQuest Online Adventures at the PS2. You may have heard of these big names. I mean, EverQuest is a huge game, don't get me wrong. It like spurred the genre, but let's go.
Is Final Fantasy XI, even though it's not that different from other games like this, it is in many ways better. It's more streamlined, it looks better, it's got the kind of Final Fantasy flavor to it.
It does.
So if you're a fan of the series, you'll find a lot of connections between this game and some of the others. But in the end, this is, like other online RPGs, a very time-consuming game, a very resource-intensive game, in that on the PS2 at least, you need to buy a $100 hard drive in order to be able to play the game, and you need an internet connection.
You need an internet connection. You need an internet connection. Isn't that crazy? Like, that wasn't a staple. I mean, I remember the network adapter for the PS2 was like a must-have, obviously, for Final Fantasy XI, but it was like an upgrade that made a lot of games far more enjoyable. Like, there were a lot of games out there that had multiplayer that you could do locally, but if you had the network adapter, you could play online. And obviously, Final Fantasy XI was like one of very few games that made use of the hard drive. Let me know in the comments if you knew other games that took advantage of the hard drive, because I don't remember any. I think SOCOM had some ideas about how they were going to use it, and like it never really came to fruition, but I'd love to hear if you had more concepts.
Network adapter, all kind of stuff. You're paying monthly fees. It's a lot to swallow. It's a lot more inaccessible than most games are, but In exchange for that, Final Fantasy XI can offer you an experience unlike that available in just about any other game out there.
That's fair.
Final Fantasy XI is clearly inspired by EverQuest in particular. However, it's streamlined, as mentioned. It's not quite as bulky and not quite as cumbersome as a lot of online RPGs are. Your character doesn't need to eat and can't grow fatigued from running too much, for example.
So, two great examples, but Final Fantasy XI is streamlined. Final Fantasy XI was a streamlined experience for the MMORPG player. What? That's amazing.
These things don't make the game simplistic, they make the game better than a lot of other examples. Instead, the gameplay of Final Fantasy XI boils down to the interesting stuff, the combat, the trade skills, the character interaction, things of that nature, questing, exploration. These are the qualities that people like about online RPGs, and these are the qualities that Final Fantasy XI does well. Some of the game's other missions aren't quite so admirable, though. In particular, there's no player versus player aspect to the game yet, but one is planned. You might know that massively multiplayer online RPGs are a pretty hardcore genre. They just, again, they just take a serious investment of resources, both time and money, to get into. Unfortunately, Final Fantasy XI doesn't really buck these bad trends. For one thing, the controls take a while to get used to. Whether you're playing on the PC or on the PS2, you're not going to pick up on this game right away.
That's fair.
Eventually, the controls do work quite well, but they're not going to grow on you immediately. Even before that, it takes about an hour just to get into the game for the first time between installing the thing, or it comes pre-installed on the PS2, patching it up for the
An hour. Dude, by like 2008, if you were starting fresh, it was going to take you like 12 hours to update this game. Look at this little play online refresher, though.
First time, setting up your account. This is a pretty expensive game already, and one of the kind of more surprising aspects of how it tries to ding you for more of your money is that by default it only lets you create one character, or lets you only have one character at a time. If you do want to have more than one character on your account, it's going to cost you an extra $1 per character, so chances are you'll stick to the one.
So that's fair, but I still think that was one of the best decisions that Final Fantasy XI ever made, was making you have one character to experience the world of Vana'diel. And you can level up different jobs, but everything is tied to that character. It made me feel tied to the world permanently and forever, unlike in games like WoW, where I enjoy playing different characters for the different classes and different mechanics that I have to learn. But at the same time, I never feel like this is me in Azeroth, for instance.
Fortunately, it's really not as bad as it sounds, because your one character, though you can't change races or your name or your gender or anything like that, you can freely change between the game's different jobs, which really define the gameplay. So you have access to pretty much all the different types of gameplay with just your one character. Like most online RPGs, Final Fantasy XI pretty much boils down to fighting lots and lots of stuff, ideally together with other players. Combat is initially very straightforward. You just target a monster and initiate auto attack and watch as they kind of bash each other over the head until someone dies, hopefully not you. Over time, though, you learn special moves that make things a lot more interesting and a lot more tactical. Furthermore, group-based special moves encourage teamwork and make for some really interesting tactics and demand some pretty high-level coordination.
Group-based special moves. I hope he tells me more, because that is not selling the idea of skill chains and magic bursts, one of the most amazing mechanics to ever be introduced to MMORPGs.
Also, like in other online RPGs, though you can solo fight on your own in Final Fantasy XI for a while,
that was it.
Kind of for your first few levels, eventually you're going to want a group. You're going to want to make friends with other people and join into parties so that the...
Yes, I do want to make friends with other people. That isn't something unique to Final Fantasy XI. That's just life. I'd like to make friends. Be my friend.
White mages can heal you as you deal damage, or vice versa. You can't go at it alone. This is a game about community, so if you just want to be the typical Final Fantasy loner, then go and play Final Fantasy VIII some more. This isn't the game for you. To be fair, there is more than just fighting in the game.
If you want to be the typical Final Fantasy loner, go play Final Fantasy VIII some more. This is Final Fantasy XI. 9 and 10 have come out. 10 rather recently. Why are we calling out 8 specifically? I haven't played 8. is the main character in 8 like a loner? Is that like a dig? I need to play 8.
There are various trade skills that you can try to get good at and make some pretty powerful in-game items. There's a bazaar where you can try to auction off said items, and there are quests you can go on. There are different modes of transportation too, including the...
What season was that? Is that spring with like all the flowers on the tree? But this review is from November. Isn't that spring? Isn't that like around Easter when they have all the eggs?
Classic Final Fantasy means of transportation, such as airships and those chicken-like chocobos, so you can ride along on one of those and get to where you need to go much faster. So there's a whole lot to Final Fantasy XI, though you'll need to jump through some flaming hoops and shell out some serious cash just in order to get started with the game.
That's fair.
However, once you do, you'll be in for something totally different from what you're probably used to, especially on the PS2.
And you'll never stop playing.
So if you're going to get started with one online RPG right now, this certainly is a pretty good way for you to go. Or if you're a Final Fantasy fan and interested in trying something completely different from what you're used to from the series, then by all means also give Final Fantasy XI a try.
Wait. First of all, 8.0, it is a 10. It is a solid 10. Perfection. That's horseshit. Also, what is going on in the background here? Does he just have the game up and like somebody's targeted? Like, they're not playing it. Well, guys, if you remember the game back in 2003, it had kind of just been released on PS2 in North America. It had been available in Japan for some time, and PC in North America for a few months. Let me know if an 8.0 is fair. I'm trying to remember exactly what the state of the game was back then. There were some wrinkles. I don't think the game was at its peak yet. So does that mean it got better? Did it get to a 9, 9.5? Or did it get worse? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Otherwise, what did you think of the PS2 footage? It was great to see some of that old-timey footage. I would love to go out and level. The funniest part is I would love to know if they were leveling faster with the 3 of them. I doubt it. Under 10, it's like really slow. They should probably just been alone, but it's always fun with more people. Yeah. I gotta get back to some eating soon on streams. Speaking of which, if you didn't know, we do stream on Twitch every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Definitely come out and say hi. Bring your thoughts on the GameSpot review of Final Fantasy XI back from November 14th, 2003. Great year, I guess. Otherwise, keep on the lookout for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace. Careful, there's ground to the left.
Also, there's ground to the right.
Oh boy, getting a little close there on the right. Don't worry, I'll help.
I did say you might have to slow down it slightly. Did you mime?
I just,